My name is Madison Carter, and at 29, I left my job as a registered nurse to care for my mother when she was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. I gave up my apartment, put my career on hold, and said goodbye to my social life to move back home. While my sister Heather stayed in Seattle, I handled everything from medication management to midnight emergencies. I truly believed my family would appreciate my sacrifice. Then, after a full year of providing round-the-clock care, my parents handed me a bill for rent and utilities. Before I tell you how I responded to this bill, let me know where you're watching from. Like and subscribe to follow my journey of standing up for myself against family who took advantage of my care. Before everything changed, I had built a life I was proud of in Boston. After graduating with my nursing degree, I secured a position at Massachusetts General Hospital in the oncology department. I loved my work, challenging as it was, and had recently been promoted to charge nurse. My apartment was small but cozy, located in a vibrant neighborhood with cafes and parks nearby. Ryan, my boyfriend of 3 years, and I were discussing moving in together. We had plans, dreams, a future we were building together. Then came the phone call that changed everything. My father, Warren, voice uncharacteristically shaky, told me Mom had found a lump. Tests confirmed stage 3 breast cancer. The prognosis wasn't terminal with proper treatment, but the journey would be brutal. Aggressive chemotherapy, radiation, possibly surgery, and countless appointments. A family meeting was quickly arranged. I flew back to my childhood home in Pennsylvania for what I thought would be a weekend of planning. My sister Heather joined via Zoom from Seattle, her 2 children occasionally appearing in the background. As we sat around the kitchen table that had witnessed countless family dinners, my father looked directly at me. "Madison, we need you," he said firmly. "Your mother needs you. You're the nurse in the family. You understand all this medical stuff." Heather immediately began listing reasons why relocating was impossible for her. "My job at the tech company is at a critical phase," she explained, bouncing her youngest on her knee. "The kids are settled in school. Jake's promotion means more travel for him, not less. I just can't uproot everyone." My parents nodded understandingly at each of her excuses. No one mentioned that my career, apartment, and relationship were apparently more disposable. "I'll help financially," Heather offered, as though throwing money at the problem absolved her of physical presence. "And I'll call every day for emotional support." When all eyes turned to me, what could I say? This was my mother facing cancer. "I can take family medical leave," I heard myself saying. "Temporarily." The relief on my parents' faces was immediate and profound. Just like that, the decision was made. I was the solution. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of arrangements. I negotiated a leave of absence from my position, hoping it would still be there when I returned. Ryan and I had a difficult conversation about long distance. He promised to wait, to visit when possible, but I saw the concern in his eyes. My landlord agreed to terminate my lease early given the circumstances. I packed my life into boxes, storing most of it in Ryan's garage. As I locked my apartment door for the final time, I told myself this was temporary. 6 months at most. Family comes first. The first few days back in my childhood home had an almost nostalgic quality. Mom was still relatively strong before treatments began. We cooked together, watched her favorite shows, and I organized her medical information into manageable systems. Then chemotherapy started, and reality set in. My mother's body revolted against the very treatment trying to save her. The violent nausea, the fatigue that made even sitting up an ordeal, the confusion from medications. I had seen it professionally with patients, but experiencing it with my own mother was entirely different. My nursing background made me valuable, certainly. I could translate medical jargon, advocate at appointments, and manage medications with professional precision. But soon, I realized my parents expected far more than medical expertise. "The kitchen needs cleaning," My father mentioned casually one evening, "And could you handle the grocery shopping? Your mother always did those things." Before long, I was responsible for cooking all meals, cleaning the entire house, running every errand, managing all medications, providing physical care, and offering round-the-clock emotional support. I became nurse, housekeeper, cook, personal shopper, and therapist rolled into one. My mother, in the beginning, expressed gratitude. "What would we do without you, Maddie?" she'd say, using my childhood nickname. But as weeks passed and treatments intensified, her appreciation gave way to expectation. My presence and services became the new normal. Meanwhile, Heather called sporadically, always with an excuse about why their promised visit had to be postponed. The kids have back-to-back soccer tournaments, or Jake's company retreat got rescheduled. Each time, she'd ask for a quick update, offer platitudes about hanging in there, then inevitably steer the conversation to her own stresses. "Being a working mom is so exhausting," she complained during one call while I was functioning on 3 hours of sleep after a night of monitoring mom's fever. "The school wants more parent volunteers, but when would I find the time?" I bit my tongue, knowing any comparison of our situations would be labeled as bitterness. 1 month stretched into 2, then 3. My leave of absence from work was extended. Ryan's calls became less frequent, our conversations more strained. My savings account dwindled. The promised temporary arrangement was beginning to feel alarmingly permanent. By the 3-month mark, I had developed a caregiving routine that would challenge even seasoned medical professionals. My day began at 4 a.m. with Mom's first round of medications, which had to be administered with specific foods and timing. After helping her with morning hygiene, I prepared breakfast that would minimize her nausea while providing necessary nutrition. Mornings were filled with either doctor appointments, which meant physically supporting my increasingly weak mother to and from the car, navigating hospital parking, and taking comprehensive notes, or at-home care involving physical therapy exercises I had researched and adapted for her condition. Afternoons brought another complex medication schedule, meal preparation, cleaning, laundry specifically done with fragrance-free detergent that wouldn't trigger her nausea, and monitoring her ever-changing symptoms. Evenings meant dinner preparation, more medications, assistance with bathing, and preparing the house for night mode when sleep interruptions would be inevitable. The physical toll on my body became impossible to ignore. I had lost 15 pounds from my already slim frame, not having time to eat proper meals myself. Dark circles became permanent fixtures under my eyes. A dull ache in my lower back from repeatedly helping Mom in and out of bed developed into sharp pain that I masked with over-the-counter painkillers. But the emotional and psychological impact was even more severe. I hadn't had a full night's sleep in months. My world had contracted to the walls of my parents' house, with occasional excursions to medical facilities. Friends stopped texting after repeatedly declined invitations. My only regular human contact outside family was with medical professionals, and even then, I was the daughter rather than Madison. Financial anxiety became my constant companion. My savings, built carefully over years of hospital work, diminished with each passing week. I had health insurance through my job, but the extended leave complicated matters. Every purchase, even essentials, came with calculations and worry. Meanwhile, my father Warren developed a habit of critiquing my caregiving methods, despite having minimal involvement himself. "Your mother prefers her pillows arranged differently," he would comment, without ever offering to arrange them himself. "I think you're giving her too much water with those pills," he'd observe, though he couldn't name which medications she was taking. When I gently suggested he might help more with basic care tasks, his response was predictable: "I'm keeping this household running. Someone has to work and pay the bills." Mom, whose personality had always tended toward stoicism, became increasingly demanding as her condition stabilized and then very gradually improved. The genuine inability to perform tasks gave way to preference not to. Madison can do it became the household refrain, uttered by both parents for everything from retrieving a glass of water to researching complex medical questions at 11 p.m. Heather's participation remained limited to occasional FaceTime calls, during which she would display exaggerated sympathy for Mom while barely acknowledging my presence. Yet somehow, these digital appearances earned her lavish praise. "Your sister called again today," Mom mentioned one evening, her tone warm. "She's so attentive, always checking in. It means so much to have her emotional support through this." I looked up from organizing the next day's medications, my hands cracked from constant washing and sanitizing. "That's nice," I managed to reply. The holidays marked a particularly difficult period. Heather and her family visited for 3 days, their first appearance in 6 months of Mom's treatment. They arrived with wrapped presents and festive spirits and were treated like returning heroes. My parents beamed throughout their stay. "Isn't it wonderful having everyone together?" Mom repeated, with more energy than I had seen in months. My father actually cooked and cleaned without being asked. The contrast to their everyday behavior was startling. On Christmas Eve, I overheard a conversation between my parents as I approached their bedroom with medication. "Heather has been such a rock through all this," my father said. "The emotional support she provides, even from across the country, has made all the difference." "I don't know what I'd do without her calls," Mom agreed. "She really understands what I'm going through in a way Madison can't seem to grasp." "Madison's just doing what she's trained to do." I froze outside the door, the medication tray trembling in my hands. Just doing what I'm trained to do? As if my sacrifice was merely professional obligation rather than profound familial love. That night, I cried silently in my childhood bedroom, feeling more alone than I ever had in my life. After the holidays, I finally confronted my father about the inequity of responsibilities between Heather and myself. "This isn't sustainable," I told him, voice shaking despite my attempt at professional calm. "I've put my entire life on hold. Heather hasn't sacrificed anything. I need more support, or at least acknowledgement." His response cut deep. "You live here rent-free. What more do you want? We're providing you with room and board while you're between jobs." Many adults would be grateful for that safety net. Between jobs. As if my leave of absence to care for his wife was an unemployment situation rather than an act of familial sacrifice. The conversation ended with nothing resolved. But something fundamental had shifted. For the first time, I began to see my caregiving role not as an act of love being recognized inadequately, but as labor being exploited systematically. 8 months into my caregiving journey, my mother's health had significantly improved. Her cancer was responding well to treatments, her energy levels were increasing, and her medical team was cautiously optimistic. Yet, paradoxically, my role as caregiver didn't diminish, it expanded. "Would you mind reorganizing the basement storage?" Mom asked one morning. "I've been wanting to get to that for years." "The gutters need cleaning before spring," Dad mentioned casually over dinner. "I figured since you're here anyway." These weren't caregiving tasks. They were taking advantage of having a full-time, unpaid household manager. The medical necessity of my presence was decreasing, but the expectation of my service remained absolute. My once vibrant social life had evaporated completely. Phone conversations with the few friends who still reached out were hurried and interrupted by calls for assistance. Dating was non-existent. My world had contracted to the 4 walls of my parents' house, with occasional visits to medical facilities. One afternoon, during a rare quiet moment, I broached the subject of returning to work part-time with my parents. "I've been looking at some per diem nursing shifts," I ventured carefully. "Just 1 or 2 days a week. We could arrange for a home health aide those days." The response was immediate and unified. "That seems very premature," my father frowned. "Your mother still needs consistent care." "I just wouldn't feel safe with a stranger," Mom added, though she had been doing her own laundry that morning. "Nobody knows my needs like you do, Madison." The conversation was swiftly redirected, my tentative bid for partial independence effectively squashed. That same week, Heather called with exciting news. She was pregnant with her third child. My parents were ecstatic, immediately planning a trip to Seattle once the baby arrived. "We'll need to stay for at least 2 weeks to help out," Mom declared, seemingly forgetting her insistence on constant care just days earlier. "Heather will need support with 3 little ones." No one mentioned who would support me after nearly a year of nonstop caregiving. No one suggested I might accompany them or deserve a break. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. Then came the email from Ryan. After months of increasingly distant communication, he had met someone new. They were engaged. He was sorry. He hoped I understood. He would always care for me. I sat on the back porch, staring at my phone screen until it went dark, feeling a profound sense of loss for a future that had once seemed certain. That same day, checking my professional email for the first time in weeks, I discovered a rejection letter from a nursing director position I had applied for before my mother's diagnosis. The feedback was kind but clear. My extended absence from the field raised concerns about current clinical knowledge. My career trajectory, once steadily upward, was now uncertain at best. The culmination came later that week. Mom had a minor fall in the bathroom. Nothing serious, but enough to frighten her. Instead of concern, my father responded with blame. "Where were you?" he demanded as I helped Mom to a chair. "You're supposed to be watching her." "I was making dinner," I replied, fatigue making my voice flat. "Like you asked me to 20 minutes ago." "Well, priorities, Madison. Safety first." The dinner could have waited. That night, after both parents were asleep, Heather called. I answered, hoping perhaps for some genuine connection with my only sibling. "God, I'm so exhausted," she began without preamble. "The pregnancy nausea is awful, and Jake is traveling again. You have no idea how hard it is." Something snapped inside me. "Actually, Heather, I think I have some concept of difficulty," I said quietly. "Oh, sure," she replied dismissively. "But you've always been the caretaker type. This comes naturally to you. And at least you don't have kids to worry about on top of everything." After hanging up, I locked myself in the bathroom and sobbed silently, pressing a towel against my mouth to muffle the sound. For the first time, I seriously contemplated packing my car and driving away without explanation. The fantasy was shockingly tempting. Instead, I opened my laptop and began researching. First, the current market rates for private duty nurses in our area. Then, home health aid costs, housekeeping services, personal chef services, medical administration fees, transportation costs for medical appointments. The numbers were illuminating. What I had provided for free out of love was worth a small fortune on the open market. My parents had received professional-level care without professional-level respect or compensation. As I compiled the information, a resolution formed. This situation would change. One way or another. I would reclaim my life, my career, and my dignity. The only question was how to make the transition while ensuring my mother received necessary care. With new determination, I began creating a detailed exit strategy, complete with alternative care options and associated costs. My service was valuable. It was time everyone, including myself, recognized that fact. A full year had passed since I'd moved home to care for my mother. The anniversary wasn't acknowledged by anyone but me. I marked it silently, thinking of the apartment I'd given up, the career I'd put on hold, the relationship that had ended, and the countless small sacrifices that had accumulated into a complete transformation of my life. The most significant milestone, however, came 2 days later at Mom's oncology appointment. Her doctor, Dr. Brennan, reviewed her latest test results with a broad smile. "The cancer is in remission," she announced. "Your body has responded remarkably well to treatment, Nancy. While we'll continue monitoring closely, you're cleared to resume normal activities with reasonable precautions. My mother squeezed my hand, tears in her eyes. I felt a complex mixture of profound relief and an unexpected anxiety. My purpose for the past year was suddenly, medically speaking, fulfilled. That evening, I prepared a special dinner to celebrate Mom's good news. As we ate, I gathered my courage and addressed what felt like the elephant in the room. I've been thinking. I began carefully. Now that Mom's health has improved, it's time for me to start looking at apartments and positions back in Boston. I could help transition to a part-time caregiver for any remaining needs before I go. The clinking of silverware stopped. My parents exchanged glances across the table. Moving out? Already? Mom's voice held surprise, as if this outcome had never occurred to her despite my repeated mentions of the temporary nature of our arrangement. I don't understand the rush, my father frowned. Your mother's only just received good news. Recovery is a process, not an event. It's been a full year, I reminded them gently. My leave of absence has been extended multiple times. If I don't return to nursing soon, my skills will be considered outdated. I need to rebuild my life. I thought you were happy here, Mom said, her tone edging toward hurt. Being with family. Taking care of things. I've been needed here, I corrected carefully. That's different from building a fulfilling life. You're doing so much better now, which is wonderful. It means my primary purpose for being here has been accomplished. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Then my father cleared his throat. When exactly are you planning this move? I'd like to start looking immediately. Realistically, finding the right position and apartment might take a few weeks. I thought I could be fully transitioned within 2 weeks, but I'm flexible. My announcement hung in the air. Mom's lips pressed into a thin line. Dad's expression hardened. 2 weeks, he repeated flatly. After everything we've done for you. The statement caught me off guard. Everything you've done for me. Providing a roof over your head. Food. Utilities. A place to stay when your nursing job wasn't working out. His revisionist history of my situation was so startling I momentarily lost my ability to respond. Mom picked up the thread. We thought you understood this was a mutually beneficial arrangement. You needed somewhere to live. We needed help with my health situation. Mutually beneficial, I echoed, finding my voice. I gave up my apartment, my job, my relationship, and my independence to provide round-the-clock medical care, housekeeping, cooking, and emotional support. And we gave you a place to live. Dad countered, as if this equivalence was obvious. My phone chimed with an incoming call. Heather. Mom immediately answered it on speaker, apparently eager for reinforcement. Heather, dear. Madison has just informed us she's abandoning ship now that my tests are good. 2 weeks' notice, like we're some kind of employer. What? She's leaving. Heather's voice conveyed shock. But what will you guys do? Who'll take care of everything? The casual assumption that everything still needed taking care of despite Mom's medical clearance to resume normal activities was telling. I'm not abandoning anyone. I interjected firmly. Mom's cancer is in remission. She's been medically cleared for normal activities. I've fulfilled my purpose for being here, and now I need to rebuild my life. Wow! Heather replied. That seems really sudden. And kind of selfish, honestly. Family is supposed to be there for each other. I wish I could be there helping out, but you know my situation. Yes. I knew her situation. Her situation had been prioritized over mine for an entire year. I stood up from the table, needing a moment to collect myself before I said something I couldn't take back. I think I need some air. As I walked toward the door, my father called after me. This conversation isn't finished, Madison. I know, I replied, but I need a break right now. I walked around the neighborhood for nearly an hour, processing the bizarre turn the evening had taken. My sacrifice wasn't just unappreciated. It had been completely reframed as me receiving charity rather than providing valuable service. When I returned, the house was quiet. My parents had retreated to their bedroom. On the kitchen counter sat an envelope with my name written on it. Inside, I found a handwritten invoice. Room and board, $1,000 per month x 12 months equals $12. 000. Utilities, average $200 per month x 12 months equals $2,400. Internet/cable, $100 per month x 12 months equals $1,200. Total due, $15,600. A sticky note was attached. We've been keeping track. Since you're treating this like a job with a 2-week notice, we thought you should know your outstanding financial obligations before departure. Your sister contributed emotionally throughout this difficult time, which we value greatly. I stared at the paper, feeling as though I'd stepped into an alternate reality. Then, with a strange calm that comes from absolute clarity, I went to my room, opened my laptop, and began working on a spreadsheet. All night, I carefully documented every service I had provided for the past year, researching standard rates for each. I itemized, categorized, and calculated with precise professional detachment. By morning, I had created a comprehensive invoice of my own. The kitchen was uncomfortably silent the next morning as I prepared breakfast. Mom sat at the table flipping through a magazine without really looking at it. Dad hid behind his newspaper. The envelope with their invoice sat prominently on the counter, its message clear. I owed them, not the other way around. I served breakfast without comment, then sat down with my laptop. I've been thinking about the bill you gave me, I began calmly. Dad lowered his newspaper slightly. It's only fair, Madison. Adults pay their way in this world. I completely agree that services should be fairly compensated, I replied, opening my laptop. Which is why I've prepared this. I placed a professionally printed invoice on the table between them. Unlike their handwritten note, mine was detailed, itemized, and thoroughly researched. What's this supposed to be? My father asked, not touching the paper. An itemized invoice for the services I've provided over the past year, I answered. My voice steady despite my racing heart. I think it's important we have a complete accounting if we're discussing financial obligations. My mother cautiously pulled the document closer. Her eyes widened as she began to read. The invoice began with nursing care, 4,380 hours, 365 days at 12 hours daily of skilled nursing services at the market rate of $45 per hour, totaling $197,100. This was actually conservative, as many nights required 24-hour monitoring during critical phases of treatment. Below that were specialized services, medication management, 365 days at $25 daily. Physical therapy assistance, 180 sessions at $50 each. Medical appointment transportation and advocacy, 86 appointments at $120 each. And symptom monitoring and documentation, 365 days at $25 daily. The household services section included meal preparation, 1,095 meals at $15 each, housekeeping, 52 weeks at $120 weekly. Laundry services, 156 loads at $25 per load, and grocery shopping and errands, 52 weeks at $75 weekly. I had even included administrative services. Insurance paperwork and medical billing assistance, 60 hours at $35 hourly, appointment scheduling and coordination, 45 hours at $30 hourly. And medication refill management, 26 instances at $25 each. The final section covered emotional support, psychological support and companionship, 365 days at $200 daily, and family liaison services, 52 weeks at $100 weekly. The grand total came to $296,760. I had subtracted their $15. $600 for room and board, leaving $281,160 due. My father's face had drained of all color. "This is absurd," he whispered, but without conviction. "Is it?" I asked quietly. "Everything here is documented with market rates for equivalent professional services. If Mom had received this level of care from professionals rather than family, this is what it would have cost." "Likely more." "We're your parents," my mother said, tears forming. "You can't bill your parents for helping during a crisis." "And I'm your daughter," I replied, my voice finally breaking slightly. "Yet you billed me for living here while providing that help. You valued Heather's occasional phone calls as meaningful contribution, but classified my physical presence and constant care as receiving charity." Dad pushed back from the table abruptly. "This is ridiculous. You can't compare professional services to family obligations." "Why not?" I challenged. "You compared my living here to a tenant arrangement rather than a caregiving situation. You created the financial framework, not me." "It's not the same thing," he insisted. But his voice lacked its usual authority. "The difference," I continued, "is that you valued the roof over my head at market rate, while valuing my skilled professional care at zero. I'm simply suggesting we be consistent in how we value things." Mom was openly crying now. "We never thought of it that way. We just assumed, since you weren't working." "I was working," I corrected gently. "Every day, often through the night. The fact that I wasn't receiving a paycheck doesn't mean I wasn't providing valuable skilled labor." I turned to a supporting document I had prepared. For comparison, hiring a live-in nurse, a housekeeper, a cook, and a personal assistant would have cost approximately $330,000 annually. Home health agencies would charge similar amounts for equivalent coverage. I provided all those services out of love, not obligation. My father paced the kitchen, running his hand through his hair repeatedly. "This is emotional manipulation," he accused, but weakly. "Is it manipulation to ask for my contribution to be valued?" I asked. "You place a specific dollar value on Heather's emotional support from across the country. What dollar value would you place on the emotional support I provided while physically present every day?" As if on cue, the phone rang. It was Heather, calling for her daily check-in. Mom put her on speaker, seemingly by reflex. "Heather," Dad said immediately, "Madison has presented us with an invoice for nearly $300,000 for taking care of your mother." "She what?" Heather's voice rose sharply. "I simply responded to your parents' invoice to me with an accounting of the services I provided," I explained calmly. "Since we're apparently placing monetary values on family contributions." "What invoice? What are you talking about?" Heather sounded genuinely confused. "Mom and Dad presented me with a bill for living here the past year," I explained. "Room and board, utilities, that sort of thing. They mentioned your emotional contribution was highly valued." Well, of course I contributed emotionally," Heather stammered. "That's what family does." "Exactly." I agreed. "That's what family does." "So I'm curious, what would you say is the fair market value of your emotional contribution over the phone compared to my physical, medical, and emotional care provided in person for 365 consecutive days?" The silence that followed was deafening. I can't put a number on that," she finally managed. "Yet Mom and Dad put very specific numbers on my accommodation," I noted. "Interesting that some family contributions can be monetized while others cannot." For the first time in a year, I felt in control of my own narrative. The startled expressions on my parents' faces told me they were finally seeing the situation from my perspective. Whether this would lead to understanding or merely more conflict remained to be seen, but something fundamental had shifted. My father left the kitchen without another word, taking the cordless phone with Heather still on the line. I could hear their muffled conversation from the living room, occasional raised voices punctuating the morning quiet. My mother remained at the table, staring at my invoice with reddened eyes. "I never thought of it like this," she finally said, her voice small. The hours, when you write them all down like this. It's overwhelming. It was overwhelming to live them, I replied simply. We sat in silence for several minutes. For the first time in our relationship, I didn't feel compelled to fill the uncomfortable void with reassurances or concessions. I'm going to pack some things, I finally said, standing up. I think we all need space to process. In my childhood bedroom, I methodically began sorting through my belongings, separating items into categories, necessities for immediate departure, things to be stored temporarily, items to be donated. The activity was oddly therapeutic, giving physical form to the emotional sorting I was simultaneously undertaking. I had been packing for about an hour when a knock came at my door. I opened it to find my father standing awkwardly in the hallway, my invoice crumpled in his hand. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice lacking its usual confidence. I gestured for him to enter. He sat heavily on the edge of my bed, looking around at the half-packed boxes. "You're really leaving," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I confirmed. "I need to restart my life." He nodded slowly, then held up the crumpled invoice. I tore this up, then taped it back together, then tore it up again, then decided I needed to keep it. "Why?" I asked. "Because it's the most honest thing anyone's shown me in years." He looked up, his eyes unexpectedly damp. When did I become the kind of father who would charge his daughter for helping during a family crisis? The raw question hung in the air between us. "I don't know," I answered truthfully. "I don't recognize the parents who gave me that bill any more than you recognize the father who would write it." He rubbed his face with both hands. "Your mother and I, we were terrified. The cancer diagnosis, the treatments, the uncertainty. I think we transferred all that fear into controlling whatever we could. And you were there, always reliable, always capable. It became too easy to take that for granted." "I understand fear," I said. "But using it as justification to exploit someone who loves you isn't acceptable." "No," he agreed quietly. "It isn't." My mother appeared in the doorway, her face showing signs of recent tears. She entered without waiting for invitation and sat beside my father. "I called Heather back," she said. "I told her she needs to come visit. In person. To help figure out what happens next." This was unprecedented, my mother actually insisting Heather step up rather than making excuses for her absence. "Madison," she continued, her voice unsteady, "I owe you an apology." "We both do." Seeing everything written down like that. I had no idea. No idea how much you were actually doing, how much you gave up. I think I didn't want to know. Because then I'd have to face how much I was taking. For the first time in months, I saw my mother, really saw her, not as a patient or a demanding parent, but as a flawed, frightened human being who had nearly lost her life and hadn't processed that trauma. The bill was never about money, I explained. It was about recognition. Seeing my contribution as valuable rather than expected. "We know that now," Dad nodded. "Too late, probably, but we know." We spent the next hour in the most honest conversation we'd had as a family in years. They shared their terror at the diagnosis, how they'd coped by controlling small things when the big thing, cancer, was beyond control. I shared my feelings of abandonment by Heather and resentment at the unequal expectations. The conversation was painful but necessary, laying bare the dysfunctional patterns our family had developed long before cancer entered the picture. 3 days later, Heather arrived without her husband or children, another unprecedented event. She looked uncomfortable as we all gathered in the living room for what felt like a family summit. "I had no idea about the bill they gave you," she began defensively. "That was completely their idea." "This isn't about assigning individual blame," I replied. "It's about acknowledging that our family has unhealthy patterns that hurt all of us in different ways." The conversation that followed was messy and difficult. Heather cried when confronted with her pattern of making promises she never kept. Mom admitted to enabling Heather's absence while demanding my presence. Dad acknowledged his tendency to value financial contribution over emotional and physical support. So where do we go from here? Heather finally asked, looking exhausted from emotions she typically avoided. First, my father said with surprising firmness, we acknowledge the sacrifices Madison made. Not just in words, but concretely. To my astonishment, my parents offered to provide the down payment for a new apartment in Boston. Additionally, they proposed a monthly stipend while I re-established my nursing career, framing it as delayed compensation for services rendered rather than charity. My initial instinct was to refuse. Taking money seemed to validate the transactional framework I had been fighting against. But I recognized that for my parents, this was the language they best understood for expressing remorse and appreciation. I'll accept help with the apartment, I decided. The rest I need to do on my own. We established new boundaries for our relationship moving forward. I would visit monthly, not as a caregiver but as a daughter. Heather committed to more frequent in-person visits and taking responsibility for helping our parents navigate any future medical needs. The most surprising moment came when my father broke down completely, something I had never witnessed in my life. I was so afraid of losing her, he sobbed, clasping my mother's hand. So terrified that she would die and leave me alone. I couldn't process it, couldn't face it, so I just focused on practical things. Bills, schedules, anything but the fear. In that vulnerable admission, I finally understood. His controlling behavior, his focus on finances, his emotional distance, all were maladaptive shields against the terror of losing his life partner. Understanding didn't excuse the behavior, but it helped me contextualize it. These weren't monsters who had exploited me, but flawed humans who had responded to trauma with the limited emotional tools they possessed. By the end of Heather's visit, we had established a new family compact. I would move out with financial help for a fresh start. My parents would seek therapy to process the trauma of the cancer journey. Heather would step up with regular visits and practical support. And we would all commit to more honest communication, however uncomfortable. As I packed the last of my belongings a week later, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: relief, sadness, hope, lingering resentment, and tentative optimism. The year had changed me profoundly, teaching me painful but necessary lessons about self-worth and boundaries. I wasn't leaving with the relationship I had hoped for, but perhaps with something more realistic and ultimately more sustainable, a family dynamic based on mutual respect rather than obligation and expectation. 3 months after moving into my new apartment in Boston, I stood by the window sipping coffee, watching the city come alive in the early morning light. The space was smaller than my previous apartment, but entirely mine, a sanctuary I had created from scratch after a year of displacement. My walls were adorned with carefully chosen artwork, my furniture selected for comfort and practicality. Most importantly, I made every decision about this space myself, from the color scheme to the arrangement of kitchen utensils. After a year of accommodating everyone else's preferences, these small choices felt revolutionary. The professional resurrection had been challenging but ultimately successful. After numerous interviews and several rejections, I secured a position at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, not in oncology as before, but in patient advocacy. A role that seemed to recognize the unique perspective I had gained as both medical professional and family caregiver. The position actually represented a step up in responsibility and compensation from my previous role, leveraging rather than ignoring my caregiving year. My new supervisor specifically valued the dual perspective I brought, noting that few advocates truly understood both sides of the medical experience so intimately. My social life was rebuilding slowly but genuinely. Old friendships were being carefully rekindled, explanations offered for my prolonged absence. New connections formed through work and a support group for former family caregivers I had joined. Dating remained on the back burner, a conscious choice to focus on rebuilding my relationship with myself first. Weekly dinners with my parents had become our new tradition. I would drive to their home every Sunday, arriving as a guest rather than a resident, bringing dessert rather than responsibility for the entire meal. The dynamic was different, sometimes awkward, occasionally tense, but increasingly authentic. My father had taken to calling before making any request, however small, prefacing with "only if you have time" or "feel free to say no." My mother had become more self-sufficient than anyone expected, joining a cancer survivors group and developing new interests outside the home. Heather had surprised us all by following through on her promises. She visited our parents monthly, bringing the children, but often leaving them with her husband for sister weekends with Mom. She and I spoke weekly, our conversations gradually evolving from surface pleasantries to more meaningful exchanges. "I never realized how much I relied on you being the responsible one," she admitted during one call. "It was so easy to be the fun, carefree daughter when you were handling everything else. And it was easy for me to resent you instead of setting boundaries." I acknowledged. We were both playing roles assigned to us long ago. Therapy had become an essential part of my healing process. My therapist, Dr. Winters, specialized in caregiver burnout and family dynamics. Our sessions helped me process not just the trauma of the caregiving year, but the longer patterns that had made that year possible. "You didn't become a nurse by accident," she observed during one session. "Caregiving has been your identity since childhood. The question now is, who is Madison apart from what she provides for others?" It was a question I explored daily, giving myself permission to discover preferences, boundaries, and desires I had previously subordinated to others' needs. One Tuesday evening, I received an unexpected package from my mother. Inside was a small wooden box I recognized from her dresser, along with a handwritten letter. "Dear Madison, this necklace belonged to your grandmother, who gave it to me when I graduated nursing school before I switched to teaching. I always planned to give it to you when the time was right, but somehow never found the perfect moment. I realize now that I never fully acknowledged something important. Long before you became a nurse professionally, you were a caregiver at heart. Your compassion and strength have always been your most beautiful qualities. What happened last year was not fair to you. We took advantage of your generous nature and professional skills without proper appreciation. No gift can make up for that. But I want you to have this as a small token of my admiration for the woman you have become despite, not because of, our parenting. I'm working on becoming the mother you deserve, even at this late stage. With love and profound gratitude, Mom." I held the delicate silver pendant in my palm, tears blurring my vision. The gesture represented something more valuable than the jewelry itself, recognition, not just of my sacrifice, but of my personhood separate from that sacrifice. The following weekend, at our regular dinner, my father presented me with information about a caregiver advocacy organization he had researched. "I thought you might be interested," he said tentatively. "They're lobbying for legislative changes to support family caregivers, tax credits, Social Security credits for caregiving years, that sort of thing." "That actually sounds really interesting," I replied, genuinely touched by his effort to understand my experience. "I made a donation in your name," he added, "not to presume you'd want to be involved, but to support the cause regardless." These small moments of recognition were healing in ways I hadn't anticipated. The damage wasn't erased, but new patterns were gradually replacing the old. In May, I met Daniel at a hospital fundraiser. He was a physical therapist who had also experienced being a family caregiver for his father after a stroke. Our shared understanding of that unique role created an immediate connection. "It changes you," he said during our first date. "People who haven't been through it can sympathize, but they can't really understand the way it consumes your identity. And how hard it is to reclaim yourself afterward," I added. Our relationship developed slowly, both of us careful with our recently reclaimed independence. but his respect for my boundaries and understanding of my history was refreshing in its authenticity. As spring turned to summer, I reflected on the profound lessons of the past 18 months. I had learned that setting boundaries wasn't selfish but essential, that love without respect becomes exploitation, regardless of intention, that family patterns run deep but aren't immutable. Most importantly, I had learned that my value wasn't determined by what I provided to others, but was inherent in my existence. My care had worth, monetary, emotional, practical worth, whether or not others recognized it. One evening, sitting on my balcony watching the sunset paint the Boston skyline in gold and pink, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for years. The journey had been painful, the confrontation uncomfortable, the rebuilding challenging. But I had emerged with something precious, the knowledge that I could care deeply for others without losing myself in the process. I still had complicated feelings about that year, pride in what I had provided, anger at how it was received, sadness for the losses it entailed. But increasingly, I felt gratitude for the forced reckoning it created. Without that breaking point, would we ever have addressed the dysfunctional patterns that had defined our family for decades? Sometimes healing requires breaking first. Sometimes boundaries must be drawn in bold, uncomfortable lines before healthy connections can form. Sometimes the most loving act is standing firmly in your own worth, even when those who should recognize it fail to do so. As I prepare to share more stories of my journey, I wonder about your experiences with family caregiving and boundaries. Have you ever had to stand up for your worth within your family? How did you balance love with self-respect when those felt in conflict? Let me know in the comments below. And subscribe if you'd like to follow more of my journey toward finding balance between caring for others and caring for myself. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, your care has value, whether others recognize it or not.